In this video, we'll be exploring the topic of beauty in astrology. What creates beauty? What is its foundation? I myself, like many, have been fascinated by this matter for years, and for just as long, I've been trying to find various methods of discovering physical beauty through the birth chart, experimenting with various techniques, and even inventing my own techniques, but to no avail. Until one day I came up with a hypothesis based on tried and tested astrological methods that very few people can test. This method is that of dignity. What I have discovered is that the dignity of a planet, more than its strength, has influence over whether someone fits conventional beauty standards. The objective of this research is to find what creates conventional geometric beauty or mathematical beauty, and this is separate from magnetism and charisma that also plays a part in attractiveness. Essentially, beauty can be divided into two categories: the actual physical beauty of a person, but also a second thing, the light that radiates from a person. That special something that you can't quite put your finger on that blesses an individual with a special charm. We can even compare and contrast two goddesses to understand this: Mother Kamala versus Mother Tripura Sundari, or her other name, Lalita. Both of these goddesses are mothers of beauty, but they differ in the aspect of beauty that they refer to. Whereas Kamala refers to physical, terrestrial, geometric, mathematical, and architectural beauty, it is Lalita, the goddess of the three worlds, that relates to the beauty that is internal, emotional, intuitive, poetic, subjective, as she is the light of beauty. Whereas Kamala rules over objective beauty or intersubjectivity, a beauty that most people agree upon, it is Tripura Sundari or Lalita that rules over subjective beauty. Whereas Kamala rules over a beauty that is obvious to everyone, it is Lalita who rules over a beauty that only you can see, the beauty that is in the eye of the beholder. In this video, we will try to focus on the beauty that is related to Mother Kamala. We will focus on individuals that are so broadly considered beautiful by most people that it becomes nearly objective. Now, it is very common within astrological circles to confuse the concept of strength with the concept of dignity, though they are to some extent related. Dignity essentially refers to whether a planet is happy or not, if it is pleased, content, and satiated, whereas strength speaks on the power of that planet to do harm or to do good. If a planet is happy and strong, it does a lot of good. If a planet is unhappy and also strong, it does a lot of bad. If a planet is happy but weak, it does very little good. And if a planet is unhappy but also weak, it has little power to do harm. The happiness of a planet is its dignity, and this is determined oftentimes by sign. The strength of a planet is its power, and that is oftentimes determined by house placement, for example. Now, to very quickly and easily study the charts of the many individuals in this video, I have decided to opt for the circular astrological charts because I find them to be quicker and easier to understand for wider audiences. Even though I have been studying sidereal Vedic astrology for many years now, I, like many people, was first introduced to astrology by way of these circular charts, so I believe it will allow for quicker understanding. The main website I'll be using for the purpose of displaying these birth charts will be AstroTheme, because it is one of the most colorful websites which will facilitate viewing. But of course, AstroTheme, unfortunately, has a problem when it comes to calculation, as it uses an Ayanamsa that is different from Lahiri. Therefore, where calculation and degrees seem very relevant and capable of changing results, I will use the website AstroSeek or any other website where the calculations are more accurate to traditional Lahiri. Now, to develop this theory of beauty, I studied nearly 360 charts of individuals considered conventionally attractive and also individuals considered by many to be unattractive. I needed both the charts of the most and the least attractive to verify repeatedly whether the hypothesis would prove true, and it did for the most part. In nearly 360 charts studied, The hypothesis proved true nearly 340 times, leaving only 20 exceptions. We will discuss these exceptions towards the end of the video. Along with this video, I am publishing a short book on astrological beauty that includes all the details presented in this video and also the details of how to find placements that are generally considered unattractive by the masses, as in this video we will only be focusing on conventionally attractive individuals. In the book also comes a list of remedies for every planet for the different conditions that they may find themselves. For example, a planet that is simply weak should often be remedied differently from a planet that is ill-dignified. Along with this book comes PDF documents of all the individuals included in this study: the conventionally attractive, the conventionally attractive, the conventionally deemed unattractive, as well as the exceptions to the theory I have presented. What we are looking for is the dignity or overall happiness of the chain of the lordship of the ascendant, the sun, and the moon. Now, what is a chain of lordship? Each sign has its lord, and when a planet is placed there, it depends on the lord for its own disposition and strength. For example, if you have a moon in Aries, Mars becomes the lord, and the condition of Mars is important because it serves as the foundation for the moon. But let us say you have a moon in Aries, but a Mars in Gemini, then Mercury becomes the lord of Mars. And now we begin to see the forming of a chain of lordship. The chain of lordship of the moon in this case would be Mars, then Mercury, and the condition of the planets along this chain are all very important for the overall health, happiness, and strength of the moon. What I have discovered that tends to work with around 90% accuracy is if the chain of lordship that connects to the ascendant, the sun, and moon are all well placed, as in within their own sign, friendly sign, or exalted, the individual has around 90% chance of being considered conventionally attractive according to this theory. But again, remember that there are exceptions that we will also discuss towards the end of this video. Before we begin, let us review the concept of planetary friendship. It is said that the friends of the sun are the moon, Mars, and Jupiter. The enemies of the sun are Venus, Saturn, and Rahu. The friends of the moon are the sun and Mercury, and moon is said to have no enemies, as all the planets are neutral to it. Mars is said to be friendly to Jupiter, Sun, and Moon, with only Mercury as its enemy. Mercury is said to be friends with the Sun and Venus, with only Moon as its enemy. Venus is said to be friends with Saturn and Mercury, but its enemies are Sun and Moon. Jupiter is friends with Mars, Sun, and Moon, but considers Venus and Mercury its enemies. Saturn is said to be friends with Mercury and Venus, but with Sun, Moon, and Mars as enemies. Now, here is more regarding planetary friendship. A planet is considered friendly to another planet if it sits 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 10th, 11th, and 12th from another planet. A planet is considered an enemy of another planet if it sits either in the same sign or 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th from another. One must combine the natural friendship between planets with the temporary friendship of houses to paint the full picture of dignity. Now, with no further ado, let us begin with our first chart. Starting off, we have the model Bianca Balti. Bianca Balti will be our first example of this small theory of beauty. Let us observe her chain of lordship. Bianca Balti is likely a Libra moon, which makes Venus the lord. The condition of Venus, then, is important to see the overall dignity of the moon. We find that Venus is well placed within Aquarius, the sign of its best friend. But now, where is Saturn placed? Saturn is found exalted within Libra. And so the chain of lordship of the moon is Venus, then Saturn, and then Venus and Saturn jump back and forth between each other, both happy and well placed, in what we call a Parivartana Yoga, or a combination of exchanges. Now let us see the chain of lordship of Bianca Balti's sun. Bianca Balti's sun is in Pisces, and the lord of Pisces finds itself in another sign of its own, Sagittarius. So the sun itself is also well placed and well dignified, and so are all the planets in the chain of lordship, which promises a conventionally attractive form. Jasmine Tooks is our next example, as she has a Cancer ascendant, making the moon its lord. The moon sits in Leo, a sign of its best friend, and the sun itself sits in Capricorn, and then Saturn in its own sign, promising a dignified chain of lordship, as all her planets relevant in the chain are relatively pleased and so happy. Jasmine has the added advantage of having a very well dignified Jupiter in her first house, and as a rule, if a planet is dignified at an aspect in the ascendants, it is another indication of great beauty. Priyanka Chopra herself has a very dignified chain of lordship, as her ascendant and her moon are in Taurus. Her Venus, which is the lord of Taurus, sits in Gemini, the sign of its friend. Mercury itself sits in Gemini, which closes the chain of lordship. Now looking at her sun is in Cancer, which makes the moon the lord. And we have just explored the moon and its chain. Overall, a dignified chain of lordship, and Priyanka Chopra is considered a world-class beauty. Charlize Theron is one of the best examples of this theory, as her ascendant is in Leo, making the sun her ascendant lord. The sun sits in Cancer with the moon, and the moon closes the chain, ensuring a perfectly dignified chain of lordship. And of course, Charlize Theron has always been considered a world-class beauty. Yet another case of a dignified chain of lordship is Vanessa Williams, the first Black Miss America. Her ascendant is Gemini, making Mercury her lord. Mercury itself sits in Aquarius. Saturn considers Mercury a friend, and because Saturn sits 12 houses away from it, it ensures their best friendship. Saturn itself closes the chain of lordship of the ascendant by sitting pretty in its own sign of Capricorn. Now let us observe the moon and the sun. Her moon sits in Sagittarius and her sun is in Pisces. Both sun and moon are considered friendly to Jupiter, and Jupiter closes the chain of lordship by sitting in its own sign of Pisces, suggesting a dignified chain of lordship that promises conventional beauty. Christie Brinkley has both her sun and moon in Capricorn, and Saturn is exalted in Libra, with Venus, the lord of Libra, sitting back in Capricorn, ensuring a mostly dignified chain of lordship. Linda Evangelista has no ascendant, but her moon is likely in Leo, making the sun its lord. The sun is exalted in Aries, suggesting that the sun is very well dignified, and then Mars, the lord of Aries, is in Leo, so we find that the chain of lordship goes back and forth between Mars and the sun in a Parivartana yoga, and Linda is of course considered one of the most beautiful faces of the 90s. For our next example, we have the South African singer Tyla. Tyla has no available birth time as of yet, so we will focus on her sun and moon. Her moon is likely in Leo, and the Lord, which is the sun, sits in Capricorn. Then Saturn, the Lord of Capricorn, is in Taurus, and Venus is back in Capricorn. The chain of lordship ends in an exchange between Venus and Saturn, making her chain of lordship a relatively well-dignified one, which promises conventional beauty. Freddie Cousin Brown has no available birth time, but her sun is well placed in its own sign of Leo. Then the moon enters into a chain of lordship with Saturn because it sits in Capricorn, and then the Lord Saturn sits in Aquarius, its own sign, closing the chain of lordship, suggesting a dignified chain of lordship, which promises conventional beauty. Ursula Andress has her sun in Pisces, and the Lord sits in his own sign of Sagittarius. She also has her ascendant in Cancer, which disposits to a moon in Capricorn, and a Saturn in Aquarius, all of which suggest a dignified chain of lordship that promises conventional beauty. Gisele Bündchen, one of the most famous supermodels of the last several decades, has her ascendant in Sagittarius. Jupiter, the Lord, sits in the sign of its contextual best friend, the Sun. The Sun sits in Cancer, and then the Moon in Libra. And finally, Venus sits in its own sign in Taurus, all of which suggest a dignified chain of lordship that promises conventional beauty. Jessica White is yet another example with a dignified chain of lordship, as her moon is in Pisces and Jupiter is in Sagittarius. She has no ascendant, but her sun is in Gemini and so is Mercury. Candela Gallo, the YouTuber, has a very straightforward chart, as her sun is already in Leo and her moon is in Cancer, dignified. One important thing to note is that, despite the fact that the sun and moon also have their friends and enemies, sun and moon can tolerate being in an inimical sign better than any other planet. For example, Mars in Aquarius does much worse than a sun in Aquarius, despite the fact that Saturn considers them both their enemies. And this just goes back to the sun and moon being the most powerful planets. Though in many ways sun and moon are affected by the ill dignity of sign, it does not affect their beauty directly, or rather, it does not affect the beauty of the native directly oftentimes. Instead, it is the lord of those planets whose conditions must be studied to assess overall conventional beauty. Next, we have Valeria Mazza with a Cancer ascendant, Moon in Pisces, and a Jupiter in Sagittarius. Now, going by her sun, we find a Sun in Aquarius, a Saturn in Taurus, a Venus exalted, and again Jupiter in its own sign, a dignified chain of lordship that once again promises conventional beauty. Amara La Negra is considered a great beauty, and finding the signs of beauty in her chart is easy, as her sun is in Virgo and so is Mercury, closing that chain of lordship. Her moon is in Pisces and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, all of which suggests a dignified chain of lordship that promises conventional beauty. Christina Reigns was considered a beauty, a moon in Pisces and a Jupiter in Pisces, a sun in Aquarius, a Saturn in Virgo, and a Mercury back in Aquarius, a mostly dignified chain of lordship. Krisa Ta is a beloved beauty with a sun in Leo and a moon in Leo. She has no ascendant, but just these planets are very much dignified. Elisabetta Canalis, the Italian actress who dated George Clooney for a brief moment, has her sun in Leo, dignified. Her moon is in Sagittarius and her Jupiter is in Cancer in a Parivirtan Yoga, both dignified. And finally, her ascendant in Scorpio that disposits to a Mars in Libra and ends with Venus in Libra, which is mostly dignified, but with a slight unhappiness on the part of Mars. Her chart, therefore, which is mostly well dignified, promises conventional beauty based on this theory. Sofia Vergara, considered a beauty even in her 50s, has both her sun and moon in Gemini and a Mercury in Cancer. Now, Mercury is naturally inimical to the moon, and so normally is unhappy in its sign. But because the moon is 12 places away from it, this suggests that in this context of Sofia Vergara's chart, Mercury is neutral to the moon. This dignified chain of lordship promises again conventional beauty, and because Sofia Vergara is so beautiful, it is likely that her ascendant and its lord, if we are ever to have it, is not only well dignified, but that she has a dignified planet in her first house. Salma Hayek is yet another example of a dignified chain of lordship, connected to the big three. Her ascendant is in Leo, and so is her sun, sitting both prominent and dignified in the house of the body. Her moon is in Pisces and her Jupiter is in Cancer, promising conventional beauty. As we proceed, we will explore charts with even longer chains of lordship. Mars and Venus are not natural enemies, and if they are placed again, either 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 10th, 11th, or 12th from one another, they can be considered friends. This is the case for the charts of the 2000s beauty Eva Longoria, who has an ascendant in Libra, a Venus in Aries, a Mars in Capricorn exalted, a Saturn in Gemini, and a Mercury in Aquarius. This is a very long chain of lordship, but not only is it mostly well dignified, she has exalted planets sitting in Kendra houses, as she has Mars exalted in the 4th. Something else that we find in the charts of highly conventionally attractive individuals are well dignified planets that are placed in prominent houses, meaning that these planets gain even more visibility and even more power to promote beauty or conventional beauty. Now, considering Eva's sun and moon, both are placed in Pisces, and Jupiter itself sits in Pisces, suggesting a dignified chain of lordship that, of course, once again, promises conventional beauty. Eva Herzogova has her moon in Taurus, her Venus in Aquarius, her Saturn in Taurus, closing that chain. Her sun is in Aquarius, which is also ruled by Saturn, which is part of the same chain. I could go on and on with this list, as this theory proves true in almost all cases that I have studied. Again, in more than 90% of cases. Adriana Lima, an ascendant in Scorpio, a Mars in Taurus, and because Venus is 2 houses away, their relationship is friendly, so Mars is happy. Venus herself is in Gemini, and Mercury too is in Gemini. Her moon is in Libra, and her sun is in Taurus, making Venus the Lord, which again sits in Gemini with Mercury, promising conventional beauty. It is important to note that, though Adriana's moon is technically 9 houses away from Venus, which makes it a temporary enemy, like I said before, neither the sun nor the moon are very much harmed by sitting in signs ruled by their enemies, at the very least, not in terms of physical beauty. This is different from the other planets that are very much harmed and that unfortunately do in fact take away from physical beauty. When Sun and Moon are slightly badly placed in terms of sign, as long as they're not debilitated, it instead comes with various psychological and even spiritual issues. But what I found is that in terms of physical beauty, it does not have too much of an effect unless they are debilitated or suffering from horrible conjunctions. Amber Valletta, a Taurus ascendant, a Venus in Capricorn, a Saturn in Gemini, a Mercury in Aquarius, making a Parvatan Yoga between Saturn and Gemini, but a relatively dignified chain of lordship. Her Moon is in Virgo, her Mercury is in Aquarius, and again, Saturn again in Gemini, a dignified chain of lordship. Bridget Moynihan, the actress from Sex and the City, has her Sun in Aries, Mars exalted in Capricorn, Saturn in Taurus, Venus exalted in Pisces, Jupiter in Scorpio, and Mars back to being exalted. Her Moon is likely in Taurus, exalted, and her Lord being Venus is part of that very same dignified chain of lordship that promises conventional beauty. Taylor Hill has her Moon in Leo, Sun in Aquarius, and Saturn in Pisces. Because Saturn is 10 houses away from Jupiter, they qualify in this context as friends, and Jupiter is in its own sign. We have Margot Robbie with her ascendant in Cancer, a Moon in Libra, and a Venus in Taurus, with only Moon slightly unhappy in Libra, but still doing well as far as beauty is concerned. Her Sun is in Gemini, and so is Mercury, all of which promise conventional beauty. Kristen Crook has no birth time, therefore no ascendant, but her Sun is in Sagittarius, her Jupiter in Scorpio, her Mars exalted in Capricorn, her Saturn in Libra, her Venus in Sagittarius, which is ordinarily a neutral sign, but because Jupiter sits 12 houses away from it, Jupiter now becomes a friend to Venus, all of which promise conventional beauty, because the chain of lordship of planets are all dignified. Her Moon is in Gemini and Mercury is in Capricorn, which follows the same dignified chain. And the list goes on and on for both the women and the men considered conventionally attractive.
She has charisma, style, grace, and that's really what it takes, along with an incredibly wonderful personality, to become a top model. It really started with Italian Vogue, who was the first to pick her up on her. It just happens that Shalom had incredible grace when she walked.
The mounting chorus of approval from the stars of the industry reached a point where Shalom landed the plum roll.
Because she's one of the tops of the moment, huh? Her body, her attitude, she's one of the great girls of the moment, huh?
Allow me to reiterate an earlier point. Now, all planets are affected by friendship, but the two planets that are most naturally resistant to the damage that comes from sitting in an enemy sign are Sun and Moon, or at the very least, they are resistant to these damages as far as beauty is concerned. Instead, what happens when they are placed in unfriendly signs is that the individual may suffer more so from psychological and even spiritual conditions. Unless, of course, the planets are debilitated, in which case, yes, they do tend to have an effect on a person's appearance. Cindy Crawford has a Gemini ascendant. Mercury, being the Lord, disposits to Saturn's sign of Aquarius, where Saturn itself sits. Moon and Sun are also in Aquarius, meaning that technically Sun and Moon ought to be badly placed in Aquarius, because as you recall, one must combine natural friendship with temporary friendship. Sun is an enemy to Saturn, naturally, and Moon is neutral to Saturn. And this in combination to temporary friendship, Sun and Moon are then inimical to Saturn because they sit in the same sign. And yet, Cindy Crawford is considered conventionally attractive. What we find is that the dignity of the Sun and Moon is not so much affected by enmity of Sun. So once again, even though Sun and Moon may be having a not very easy time, sitting in Aquarius with Saturn also in Aquarius in various other ways, it seems as though the effect is not so strong as to affect the person's appearance. Again, Sun and Moon tend to only affect the person's appearance, either if they are debilitated or if they're suffering from very, very harsh aspects. We have to now have a conversation on debilitated planets. Now, a debilitated planet by definition loses all of its dignity, and instead of being happy becomes miserable. And in accordance with this theory, it ought to rob a chart of conventional beauty. But there is a special yoga that promises to revert the state of debility to a planet if certain conditions are met. And this yoga is called Nishbhang Raj Yoga, the cancellation of debility. When a planet benefits from Nishbhang Raj Yoga, there are some astrologers that say that its condition becomes even better than if it were exalted. This is a very interesting consideration. As a first example, we have the famous Indian actress Aishwarya Rai. This legendary beauty has a Sagittarius ascendant, with Moon also on the ascendant, making Jupiter the Lord. But what we find is that Jupiter in Capricorn is debilitated. On the basis of our theory, this ought to mean that she would not be considered conventionally attractive. But, according to Nishbhang Raj Yoga, if a planet is debilitated in a certain sign, and yet the planet that is normally exalted in that sign is itself either in its own sign or exalted, it may save a planet from debility. What we find is that Mars is normally exalted in Capricorn, and in Aishwarya's chart, Mars is in its own sign in Aries, which means that Jupiter is rescued from debility through Mars' assistance. So now let us continue with the chain of lordship. Her ascendant and moon are in Sagittarius. Her Jupiter with its debility reverse is in Capricorn. Her Saturn in Gemini. Her Mercury in Scorpio in the dead Avasta, meaning that it has little power to do harm. And Mars again in its own sign. This promises a dignified chain of lordship, which, again, promises conventional beauty. But notice something else. Mercury is badly placed in Scorpio because Mars is 8 places away from it, which means that Mars and Mercury are enemies here. But Mercury again is also in the Avasta, considered dead, which means that it does not have much power to do harm. But the conversation on Avastas is a conversation for later. Having introduced this new yoga, let us review the conditions that create it. A debilitated planet benefits from Nishbhang Raj Yoga if A. A planet exalts in its sign. B. The planet that normally exalts in its sign is in its own sign. C. The planet whose sign the debilitated planet normally exalts in is itself exalted or in its own sign. D. The debilitated planet is conjunct or directly aspected by the planet that normally exalts in the sign of its debility. Now, it is important to note that there are astrologers that consider Nishbhang Raj Yoga when debilitated planets are somehow connected to Kendra houses. But in my experience, Kim Kardashian herself has first and foremost an ascendant dignified and strong in first house. This combination of a planet being both well dignified by sign and strong by house suggests great beauty. What we will discuss later is that even if a planet is not part of the chain of lordship, but is dignified and placed in strong houses, like the 4th, 7th, 10th, or 1st, the native is still given a strong dose of beauty from that planet. But we will still have to consider the rest of Kim's big three. So, Kim Kardashian has a Scorpio ascendant with Mars sitting on the ascendant, promising great beauty. But there's still more. Kim Kardashian has a moon in Pisces that displaces to a Jupiter in Virgo. Jupiter naturally hates Mercury, as it is its enemy. But observe that Mercury is placed 2 houses from it. This means that Jupiter, within the context of Kim Kardashian's chart, is neutral to Mercury, and so occupies a neutral dignity. Also notice that Jupiter and Saturn are dignified, but it could be argued that Jupiter is winning or resisting the war, since Jupiter has more natural strength than Saturn. Jupiter, of course, also has the advantage of being at a lower degree. Then we find Mercury very happy in Libra, in the sign of its contextual best friend, and then Venus in Leo. Venus is naturally an enemy to the Sun, but in Kim Kardashian's chart, Sun and Venus are neutral. So Venus is in Leo, and then, oh wait, Sun is debilitated in Libra. But actually, if you look closely, the Sun is not truly debilitated, because it is saved by Mars in its own sign. Allow me to explain. If a planet is debilitated, but if the lord of the sign of its exaltation is either in its own sign or exalted, then the debilitated planet is saved from debility. Her Sun is in Libra, but Sun naturally exalts in Aries, and we find Mars rules Aries and sits in Scorpio, which means that Kim Kardashian's Sun is saved from debility. In the D1, her planets are so well placed that it produced the condition of conventional beauty that we observe even in her young age. Beyoncé has another interesting Nishbhang Raj Yoga that I did not introduce in the beginning. First, we see her sun is perfectly happy in Leo. Then we see Moon and Mars are both debilitated. If we recall from earlier, a planet can be saved from debility if there's a planet that is exalted in its signs. But looking at Aries and Scorpio, no planet is exalted there to save Mars. No planet is exalted in Cancer either to save the Moon. Another condition is if the lord of the sign where the planet exalts is either exalted or in its own sign. Mars exalts in Capricorn, but when we look at her Saturn, it is not exalted or in its own sign. Moon too exalts in Taurus, but Venus is not exalted or in its own sign either. Another condition that can save a debilitated planet is if a planet is debilitated in a certain sign, if the planet that normally exalts there is placed there. Jupiter naturally exalts in Cancer, but Jupiter is not there to save Mars. So what explains Beyoncé's beauty? Here's what helps her: Parivartan Yoga, or the exchange of planets by sign. Another condition of Nishbhang is if two planets are debilitated but also form exchanges, then they can save each other from debility mutually. Moon is debilitated in Scorpio, a sign ruled by Mars. Mars sits and is debilitated in Cancer, which is ruled by the Moon. So they exchange each other's signs, which saves them both. This creates a condition to suggest a dignified chain of lordship, which of course promises conventional beauty. Legendary supermodel Shalom Harlow has her ascendant and sun in Scorpio, making Mars the lord that sits beautifully in its own sign. Because Sun is well disposed in the ascendant, being both dignified and strong, it adds another dose of beauty. Moon is in Pisces and Jupiter is in Capricorn, debilitated. But wait, the planet that normally exalts in Capricorn must either be exalted itself or in its own sign to save Jupiter, and in Shalom's case, it is, suggesting an overall dignified chain of lordship which creates the condition that promises conventional beauty. Margaret Qualley has her ascendant in Aquarius and her sun in its own sign, promising conventional beauty, not just because her ascendant lord is dignified, but also because it is prominent, as all planets in the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th houses are considered very prominent. Having a dignified planet that is also prominent and connected to the first blesses with an extra dose of beauty. Her moon and sun share the same lord, Venus, and her sun is of course saved from debility in Libra because Venus is also in Libra. Yasmin Ghouri is yet another example of Nishbhang, but her chart has conditions we have yet to fully discuss. There are other combinations that astrologers say also creates Nishbhang, but in my experience, these combinations are generally speaking less effective in fully reversing debility. Another condition, according to many astrologers, is the following. If a planet is debilitated, but it finds itself kendra to the moon, and at the same time, either the lord of its debility or the lord of its exaltation sign are also in a kendra to the moon, the debilitated planet is rescued to some degree from debility. Notice in Yasmin's chart, her moon is in Capricorn. The lord Saturn is debilitated in Aries, with no planet to save it in the ways that we've discussed. But notice that Saturn is kendra to the moon as it sits 4 houses away. And notice that Venus, which is the lord of Saturn's debilitation, is itself kendra to the moon as it sits in the same house as the moon. This suggests that to a fairly good extent, Yasmin's Saturn is lifted from debility. And if you study the rest of her chains of lordship, you'll find that they are very dignified, promising conventional beauty. Avastas are an important concept for strength in astrology. There are times when a planet would actually do the individual great harm, but because it is in a dead Avasta, it does not deliver its horrible results, or at least not as much. Dutzen Cruz is a good example of this, as her sun and moon are in Capricorn and Aquarius respectively, dispositing to a very unhappy Saturn in Scorpio. And although Saturn in this case is neutral to Scorpio, as Mars is 4 places from it, what is really aggravating Saturn is being conjunct Ketu, which essentially acts like Mars and antagonizes it. But Ketu and Saturn are within the first 6 degrees of an even sign, the 8th sign of Scorpio, meaning that they are in a dead avasta, which reduces their power and ability to do harm. What one finds is that neutral or powerless planets often also contribute towards beauty, as neutrality offers more opportunity for planets to improve than does outright negativity. To introduce one of the very few male examples in this video, we have Tom Selleck, who has his sun and ascendant in Capricorn, his Saturn in Gemini, but Mercury is conjunct an enemy, Mars. Both of them are in Sagittarius, and this would often spell disaster. But because Mars and Mercury are in the last avasta, they are considered much less powerful, which reduces their ability to do harm. They are also in the 12th house, which is a hidden house that also weakens a planet and reduces its overall impacts. On top of that, Mercury and Mars are conjunct Ketu, and though Ketu and Mercury are enemies, Ketu, which is the inhaler of material reality, also helps to absorb some of Mercury's negativity. David Cornswet is another good example of this. He has no verified birth time as of yet, so we'll be discussing his other placements. He has a moon in Aquarius and a Saturn also in Aquarius, and so this chain of lordship is complete and quite dignified as far as beauty is concerned. Remember, like I said, that usually when two planets are in the same house, they are inimical. But in the case of Sun and Moon, they often do not suffer the enmity coming from other planets nearly as severely as any other planets, at least as far as physical looks are concerned. For example, if Mars were in the same place as the Moon is right now, sitting also in Aquarius, with Saturn also in Aquarius, Mars would be much more unhappy. But the Sun and Moon can handle these inimical aspects, conjunctions, and also inimical houses, and so his Moon is still not too badly placed, although he may be suffering from some psychological issues. But now we have his Sun. His Sun is in Gemini, and his Mercury is quite badly placed in Cancer, a sign ruled by his great enemy, as even in this chart, they are 8 places away. This would usually be something that takes away from the dignity, but what we observe is that Mercury is in the very first degree of Cancer, and according to the Avasta, it is considered quote-unquote dead or powerless, meaning that it does not have a lot of power to deliver its harmful blows. So his chain of lordship are all relatively quite dignified. Now let us move on to combustion more specifically. It is said that something else that gives a planet strength is its distance from the Sun. The further away a planet is from the Sun, the more light it possesses. But this is not always a good thing, because we may be giving more light to a badly dignified planet, and in that planet's state of unhappiness, it may do harm. As our first example, we have Justine Skye. To start off, she has her moon in Cancer, which is not only well dignified, but is also strong. Because if you go by her C-rated birth time, her moon is in the 10th house. Again, if a planet is well dignified and placed in the Kendra houses of 1, 4, 7, and 10, it will add to an individual's beauty. But moving on, her Sun is in Leo, again dignified. Now, her ascendant, according to her available birth time, is in Libra. Her Lord Venus is in Leo. This means that Venus is very unhappy in Leo, which would take away from its beauty ordinarily, but look at how close Venus is to the Sun. Venus is not only losing a war against the Sun, but it is also combust, suggesting that it is losing power to do harm. So overall, her planets are dignified, and the non-dignified planets are essentially castrated, promising an individual of conventional beauty. Carla Bruni is yet another example. Her Sun is in Sagittarius, her Jupiter is in Leo, a Parivartan yoga between friends, so quite dignified. Her Moon is in Leo, and so this adds to the chain of lordship. Again, the Moon and its chain is dignified. But now we have her ascendant in Gemini. Mercury goes to Sagittarius, suggesting that Mercury is badly placed. But look closely, as Mercury is also very close to the Sun, within 3 degrees, and so considered combust. And this perhaps takes away from Mercury's power to do harm. And so it is again ill-dignified, but also castrated. Now we have Anne Hathaway, who is considered a beauty among many, who has a relatively dignified chain of lordship, as her Moon in Virgo disposes to a Mercury in Libra, and Venus is also in Libra. Her Sun is in Libra, but saved from debility by Venus in Libra. Her ascendant in Scorpio disposes to Mars in Sagittarius, which disposes to Jupiter in Libra. But look, Jupiter is a great enemy to Venus, meaning that he is causing her harm, and Jupiter is also harmed quite badly by this conjunction. But look again, Venus and Jupiter's power is reduced not only by being in the 12th house, not only by being in the last avasta of an odd sign, meaning that they lose power, but also by being conjunct the Sun, meaning that in this state of combustion, they again lose power, minimizing the harm to her chart, which promises to some extent conventional beauty. Now, let us go more deeply into the concept of defeats in war. Now, remember that in general, conjunctions are considered enemy aspects in Vedic astrology, and planets are said to be at war with one another if they are within 3 degrees. The planet that holds the lesser degree is said, generally, to be harmed in battle, but wins the war, forcing the other planet into enslavement. But that is not all. Owing to the natural strength of planets, there are 2 planets that are never defeated in war, regardless of the situation, and those 2 planets are Sun and Moon. But there is still more. Owing to natural strength, even if 2 planets are conjunct, some planets naturally possess more strength than others. The ranking goes as follows. The Sun naturally possesses the most strength, followed by the Moon, the next brightest planets, followed by Venus, then Jupiter, then Mercury, then Mars, then Saturn. What this means is that, say Jupiter and Saturn are at war with one another. Even though Saturn may have the lower degree in whatever context it finds itself, because Jupiter is naturally stronger than Saturn, Jupiter may still not be defeated in war, regardless of this relationship. That being said, they may still do each other quite a bit of harm. So now let us proceed. Catherine Zeta-Jones has a rather dignified chain of lordship, a Sun in Virgo, and a Mercury also in Virgo. But now observe this. She has an ascendant in Scorpio, which disposes to a Mars in Sagittarius, and a Jupiter in Virgo, conjunct Mercury. Her moon also partakes of a chain of lordship, including Jupiter, because her moon is in Pisces. Her Jupiter is very much unhappy in a heated battle against Mercury. But observe a few things. In terms of degree, Mercury defeats Jupiter, and in terms of sign, Mercury has an advantage because this conjunction occurs in its own sign. Though Jupiter possesses a little bit more natural strength than Mercury, we could consider Jupiter to be defeated in war here. If a planet is defeated by another planet, it essentially becomes a prisoner of war of the other planet and must now operate in accordance to the victor's will. And if the victor himself is well dignified, when he enslaves the losing planet, he will enslave him for the purpose of his dignity, for the purpose of goodness. All of which suggests a relatively dignified chain of lordship, with the harms being minimized, which promise conventional beauty. Maggie Rollins has no available birth time, but she has Sun and Moon in Aquarius, the lord of which, Saturn, is unfortunately badly placed in Sagittarius, as Jupiter is 5 houses away. But look, Saturn and Mars are conjunct. Mars not only has the lower degree, it is also naturally better dignified. And it also has the advantage of more natural strength than Saturn. And so it successfully castrates Saturn, minimizing the harm done to the appearance of the individual. And because Mars is naturally better dignified than Jupiter, when it enslaves Saturn, it will not enslave it for harmful and evil purposes, but for better purposes. Gia Karanji has a chart that is mostly quite dignified. Her Virgo ascendant disposes to a Mercury in Capricorn, which disposes to a Saturn in Sagittarius. Moon in Aquarius and Sun in Capricorn also disposes to a Saturn in Sagittarius. And since Jupiter is also in the same sign, this suggests that Saturn is unhappy. What makes this worse is Mars' conjunction, since this makes them great enemies. But notice this, Mars not only has the lower degree, it also again possesses a little bit more natural strength than Saturn. Mars is also better dignified than Saturn, which means that Mars will enslave Saturn for good purposes. Now we need to have a conversation on one of the most dreaded yogas, Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga, and the influence that it may have on beauty. This is a yoga that is formed when all the planets in a chart find themselves on either side of Rahu and Ketu. We can see this in the circle charts, but it is perhaps better illustrated by the diamond charts of North India. Observe that all the planets find themselves on one side of Rahu and Ketu. Sometimes it is the case that Rahu is the beginning and Ketu the end of the serpent line, and other charts have Ketu as the beginning and Rahu at the end. Now, this yoga is one that I am still studying as it relates to beauty, but something that I've noticed is that in the charts of some of the great beauties, this yoga is quite present and may actually save the chart from producing natives of less conventional beauty. Let us begin with the chart of Irina Shayk. Irina Shayk has a moon in Libra that disposes to a Venus in Sagittarius. Venus is combust next to the sun, but the Lord of Sagittarius is debilitated. And notice that there is no planet to save it by way of Nishbhang Raj Yoga. This is odd because this chart and its combinations are at variance with the theory that we have been developing thus far. But notice something. Irina Shayk has a Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga starting from Ketu. Again, it starts from Ketu because in the line from Ketu to Rahu, all the planets are contained. On the other hand, on the line from Rahu to Ketu, there are no planets. Let us keep this in mind as we consider several other charts. Supermodel Dutzen Kroos is another example of this. Though her Jupiter is not part of the chain of lordship of her sun and moon, her birth time is still unknown. There is seemingly no planet to save Jupiter by way of Nishbhang, but we find, very interestingly enough, she too has a Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga, again starting from Ketu. Many astrologers consider it to be a Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga, even when only one planet is exempt and existing outside of that line. In the case of Gabrielle Union, she possesses a partial Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga because Saturn alone is outside of the line. But Saturn is also not part of the chain of dispositorship of the sun and moon. Notice that Gabrielle's chart is mostly well dignified. Her Venus is debilitated but saved by the moon because, recall, a planet can be saved from debility if another planet that normally exalts in one of its signs finds itself either exalted or in its own sign. The moon normally exalts in Venus's sign of Taurus and currently finds itself in its own sign of Cancer, and so this saves Venus. But notice something else. Gabrielle's sun is debilitated with no savior. But again, Gabrielle conforms to conventional beauty standards. And oddly enough, she too has a Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga starting from Ketu. So we are finding this odd pattern here, where when someone has a Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga starting from Ketu, and if there are debilitated planets within that line from Ketu to Rahu, it seems as though the debility of that planet seemingly has no effect on a person's appearance. This is interesting. It must be noted that there is no astrologer that considers Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga as a means of reversing debility. Yet it is strange that in these charts, what would ordinarily lead to a loss of conventional beauty ends up leading to great beauty. Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga is a very interesting topic, but until now I have only studied around 30 charts with these combinations, so it is not enough to conclude anything. But in the future, when I come to make a second beauty video, I will make sure to have collected hundreds of charts that include Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga to specifically speak of this yoga, to really understand what impacts, if any, it has on beauty. So please do not take these few examples to be conclusive. I am simply sharing an interesting observation that I am developing. In my research book, I go more into detail on Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga as it relates to this beauty study. And I also speak of Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga starting from Rahu and how it tends to produce the opposite effects. Individuals who may not be considered conventionally attractive, but with certain conditions. If you know of a conventionally attractive celebrity or a celebrity considered unattractive who has a Kal Sarpa Raj Yoga, please comment below so I can collect the data. Now, it is true that for the most part, all the planets within the chain of lordship of the Sun, Moon, and Ascendant must be well dignified or at the very least neutral. But there is one planet that we can allow to be badly placed without it costing the individual's physical beauty, and that planet is Venus. Of all planets that can cause ugliness, Venus is the least likely to do so, even if it is badly placed. Here are just a few examples, but in my research book, I speak of many more examples. Let us consider the case of the famous old Hollywood actress Gene Tierney. Her chart is mostly well dignified. She has her Sun in Scorpio, her Mars exalted, her Saturn in Virgo, and Mercury in Libra, which ends with a Venus in Sagittarius, which is slightly badly placed. Then we find Jupiter in Leo, which re-begins the chain. Her Moon in Aquarius disposes to a Saturn in Virgo that re-begins the chain again. Notice how all the planets are actually happily placed, as they are either very happy in a friendly sign or actually even exalted. So this slight ill dignity of Venus seems to not be having too strong of an effect on her overall appearance. Emily Ratajkowski has a very dignified and even exalted planets all throughout her chain. She has a Cancer ascendant with Jupiter exalted. Mars is debilitated but saved by Jupiter. We will get to Venus in 1 second. See that Moon is in Pisces, which again disposes to an exalted Jupiter. See that Sun is in Taurus and Venus is in Cancer. Venus is in Cancer and is unhappy. Again, it seems as though Venus can afford to be badly placed without costing the beauty of the individual. Of course, Angelina Jolie has similar placements, as her Venus is also badly placed on the ascendant, and yet she is considered a world-class beauty. Hedy Lamarr has an ascendant in Gemini, her Mercury well placed in Libra, her Venus in Scorpio, and Mars also in Scorpio. Her Sun is in Libra, debilitated, but because Sun normally exalted in Aries, ruled by Mars, and Mars finds itself either exalted or in its own sign, Mars lifts Sun from debility. Her Moon is in its own sign and also in the second house, increasing the face's attractiveness. But notice that only one planet is slightly badly placed, and that is Venus. Venus is typically neutral to Mars, but because Venus and Mars are in the same house and in a sign ruled by Mars, Venus is slightly unhappy, yet Hedy Lamarr is still a great beauty. One thing that you will notice is that, though all planets have their own unique beauty type, specifically it is Venus that is the planet of beauty. And so even when Venus is badly placed, it may not cost the individual too much as far as attractiveness. This is different from planets that are specifically planets of unattractiveness. Other things that we did not get into this video are house placements and how house placements can magnify or minimize the condition of a planet. So if a planet is badly placed but is in a more hidden house or a house that has less emphasis, it will not affect the individual as much. Something else that we did not discuss in this video that we may discuss in future videos and future writings is the role of the ascendants. Depending on the ascendant of a chart, certain planets are going to be benefited and certain planets are not going to be benefited. Finally, let us discuss some of the exceptions to these rules that we've been discussing all throughout this video. Following are women who are considered by the masses as very conventionally attractive, but whose charts do not correspond to the theory of beauty presented in this video. First, we have Christy Turlington, a woman who fits conventional beauty standards and is considered by many of her contemporaries of the 90s as the greatest beauty among them. But when we open her chart, we do not find the markers that we've become familiar with throughout this video. We see that Christy has her Sun and Ascendant in Sagittarius, but her Jupiter is in Virgo, and Mercury is 5 houses away, suggesting that Jupiter is deeply unhappy, and also in her 10th house. We then find Mercury's in Capricorn, rather dignified. We go to Saturn and we find it in Pisces, and of course, Jupiter is 7 houses away, suggesting that Saturn is again also ill-dignified. Christy Turlington, this international legend in the beauty industry, possesses 2 ill-dignified planets in her chain of lordship, and yet she fits the bill of beauty. Yet another example is Naomi Campbell, who has an ascendant in Capricorn, a Saturn debilitated in Aries, but her Saturn is saved because it is exalted in the D9, which is another condition of Nishbang. If a planet is debilitated in the D1 but exalted in the D9, or at least its own sign, the planet is said to be lifted from debility. As you can see, there are several things that can save a planet from debilitation. Then we see Mars in Taurus, Venus in Gemini, and Mercury in Aries. Her Sun is also in Taurus, so follows the same chain of lordship. But now, look at her Moon. Naomi Campbell has a debilitated Moon, and yet she is still considered conventionally attractive. I could go on, but there were a total of 10 exceptions in the charts of women and also the charts of men, making a total of 20 exceptions. What this tells us is that the topic of beauty will continue to be an ongoing one in order to explain the exceptions that exist in this world. So the viewer may consider this as my first beauty video, with hopefully many more to come, and with results that are ever more nuanced, so we can close the gap further and further. In my book, I speak of various mantras you can recite to improve your planets in whatever condition it is in. Though nearly 400 charts is a good number, it is not nearly enough to conclude the topic on beauty. I am very much interested in exploring individuals that are exceptions to the rule, individuals whose charts do not conform to this theory, and so this is a call to action to the viewer. If you know of a celebrity who is considered conventionally attractive, but whose chart does not conform to the theory here presented, please comment their names below for further research. So if you are Brazilian and consume a lot of Brazilian media, perhaps Indian and know various Bollywood celebrities, perhaps Nigerian and know a lot of Nollywood celebrities, or wherever it is that you are from, please comment below the various individuals that fit conventional beauty standards and yet are exceptions to the theory presented in this video. If I end up collecting enough data, I can perhaps make a second beauty video looking at even more nuanced conditions that create conventional beauty. Thank you for watching.
Today, this 23-year-old California native brings fashion to life. Christie's extraordinary success as a model has made her a recognized face around the world.
This was a girl that could not start out with mediocrity because she's too interesting.